Well, guys, it's another day, it's another project. This is the 2014 Yamaha Viking that you've seen previous videos of, where we rebuilt the engine, as well as just have done some general maintenance to it, like the brakes and things. Over the past, 3/4 of a year, we got it last summer, worked on it, had it running for the fall and winter, and now spring. We've really found that it's a nice machine. It's got a lot of power. It's very smooth on the straight and level. It is a little bit noisy, but one of our major complaints actually is the steering on it. This unit that I had gotten, again, because it was wrecked and on Facebook Marketplace, it didn't have the EPS system, which is the electric power steering system. And I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that we've gotten a chance to kind of use it a little bit, we found that this is actually pretty cumbersome to take on tight turns of trails and things. And I think that's because of the wide wheelbase of it, the wide stance of it being a 3-up seat. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to find a way that I could bring a power steering system into this without, breaking the bank. My first approach was actually to go look for OEM parts on eBay, stuff stripped off of wrecked machines. And I was finding that, I could find the power steering module for under $200, the power steering motor that actually interfaces with your drive column for another couple $100, but then you needed brackets and wires, and it wasn't very clear all that I needed. All said, it was probably going to be $500 or $600. What I ended up doing instead, though, is I went on forums, checked over some different reviews and things. There's a number of different suppliers that do comprehensive kits that include all the parts that you need, that you can kind of modify your existing machine to get it into your rig. The brand that I ended up picking was called Super ATV. They seem to have the most kind of detailed instructions, most comprehensive component list and things like that. And just overall, it seemed like they had gotten good reviews. A lot of people said that, installing these kits really made a night and day difference between how they handled on the trails and, just general drivability. So I'm really looking forward to that. I went with the Super ATV, like I said, the brand anyways. They have a lot of different kits for Hondas and Suzukis and Vikings or Yamahas and things. So a lot of different options for different guys out there. So maybe something to consider. I put it in the description just if it's of interest to you. So anyways, the first step will be to get the cowl off, the hood off, in my case, a windscreen, and then my side mirrors. So we'll get into this and see how this all goes. And, I'll give you kind of an honest review of what I'm thinking of as far as the quality of the parts, and then just overall how they go in, and hopefully the performance of them. That's the whole reason we're doing this. So let's get into it. So looking at the front of the Viking, we're going to have a combination of these 10mm hex nuts, various locations around the cowling, as well as a number of these plastic clip retainers that are kind of everywhere. They're inside the cowling, inside like the cab area on this front, and even some underneath in the front. And the goal here is that once we get all these clips out, we can take the cowling, and although you can't get it off entirely from the frame because the frame just passes through, and I don't really want to take off the whole frame to do this. What we're doing is we're just taking the cowling free so that it can slide up the frame, and we'll use a bungee or a strap or something like that just to keep it out of our way, give ourselves the easiest access to where the power steering module is going to go. So I've got 8 of these hex nuts that have come off, hex bolts that have come off. As you saw, there's a couple coming in from behind, right behind where the headlight is. Let's see about these clips. They're kind of plastic screws that expand as you bring them in. That's sometimes stripped out though, so you have to kind of pry on it while you're screwing it. Something like one of these metal picks sometimes helps. You can get it underneath the head of the plastic screw. I've also got what looks to be a 4mm socket head screw here. That's on both sides. So I've got the turn signals, and they're actually protruding through the black kind of plastic cowling behind this upper lid here. And so while all the screws are loose, I've got to detach my blinkers so that I can kind of feed them through the hole. I think that's what's holding me up here. And I was incorrect earlier. There are two hex bolts, that are holding above and below the blinker between this black plastic kind of fascia piece and the overall green cowl. Okay, so once we get that turn signal detached, it should come out a little easier. Let's do the same thing to the other side. I only have to cut the electrical tape. There's some electrical tape kind of sealing the connector together and then also holding it to the headlight unit so it's not rattling around. So that's all I'm doing here. And once that comes free, it's just two pins that are connected for the blinker harness. I don't know if your machine's got it or not the same way, but something to watch out for as you're trying to get your cowl apart. So to get ourselves oriented here, we're on the driver's side. This is the steering column coming down through the dash unit. We've got a knuckle that comes down, and way down there is your steering pinion. What this kit does that we're going to install today is it's kind of an interposer. It accepts the steering wheel on one side on the top end, sits about here, and gives you electronic assist on it with a motor. And that'll replace this lower section of the driving column, of the steering column. And then we have a kind of like a computer module, a power steering module that'll interpret the torque required based on your steering and how much needs to be forced down into the rack and pinion. So this is where we'll mostly be working. From what I'm seeing here, initially I would have thought that I could have just come up through the tire, through the wheel well, maybe take off the tire to give myself some access in here. But I see now that these hex bolts are coming in from the top of the steering. So even if I had been able to reach from underneath to get here, I'd still need to take the cowl off to get these guys out. So let's have a look at this new kit and see where we're going from here. So this is the kit I purchased. This is from the Super ATV store. We've got the power steering module, so this is the brains behind it. We got some metal brackets, and these are pretty heavy gauge. That's pretty heavy gauge, hefty metal. Seems like it's pretty well painted. We've got some miscellaneous screws and things in here. fasteners. This is a wiring harness that allows you to adapt this to your existing like vehicle control module or ECU or something. Another big bracket. Must be the second half of this guy to get everything mounted in there. Got some pretty stout looking tabs on that. Probably just more like frame nuts. Let's see. This is a knuckle for my steering column. Comes in there. This is the new section of steering column to use due to the reduced length required. And then this is kind of the meat of it. This is the power steering motor. That's a lot beefier than what I actually had pictured when I saw the pictures online, or what I had imagined when I saw the pictures online. So this will be what's doing all the work for me going down the road. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is just disconnect my battery. I don't know that it's necessary to do the kit we're doing, but it seems like if you're unplugging stuff from your control module, it doesn't hurt to unplug it. The next thing we'll be doing is focusing up there by the steering column, by the steering wheel bracket. And I believe that, I don't know, those look like 12 or 13 millimeter bolts on there. We're going to remove that so that comes down, that bracket. See, so we got to take off these steering column support bracket bolts. These are 12 millimeter. I had to break these front ones free already. There's not a lot of room to work with them. And it seems like you need to work these ones first, because if you work these back ones off, even though they're easier, if you take them off first, then the bracket's going to hang funny. And it's going to be harder to get these front ones off. They're already difficult enough as it is, just from an accessibility standpoint. And you can't back them out too far either, because if you do, then they're going to pinch your socket between this plastic dash section. See, so this is my turn switch. Got green, red, yellow. With red being common, green being right. And then my horn is orange and white. I don't really know if that's a consistent wiring or not. And then my blinker indicator. I hope that's got a little connector on there. So I guess now with this loose, we could get this top knuckle off the steering. I think that's probably a 10 millimeter on there. Yeah. So 10 millimeter. But it has like a slot. Yep. Okay. So it's got a flat in there. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. There's a little bit of a dimple in the spline, so that even if it's loose, it won't slide out further than what that nut or what that bolt is going to retain it at. So now we'll focus down below where the column goes into the rack and pinion. So after getting that steering bracket removed, we got to get this column off of the rack and pinion there. It looks like maybe only a 10 millimeter nut holding it in. 10 millimeter bolt. See if I can get anything to get access to it. Let's turn the wheel a little bit. Yeah. Turn it straight towards me. I guess it wasn't that bad. So I know this probably isn't a mechanic's preferred approach, but I was having a real hard time getting this knuckle off of the rack and pinion down below. It was loose up until a point and then just seemed kind of seized up. Since I'm not reusing this steering column, I don't mind getting a little damaged. I mean, it's still a usable part, but it's not pristine anymore. But what I did is I would take my long spike and kind of wedge it in here and hit it in with a hammer just to the point where you could feel it bite in enough that you could tell it was kind of opening this jaw on this knuckle, and that allowed me to open it up enough that I could actually remove it up and off of the spline of the rack and pinion. So just something to keep in mind if you guys are struggling with that yourselves. So here's the new part that we're installing. This came with the kit. There's a sliding side for some kind of adjustment that I'm going to keep on the top end where it's a little bit more accessible. On the bottom end, this is the knuckle that will go in place of where your original piece had been that we just pulled out. Upon first inspection, this is kind of a beefy bar. It actually is, I think, a larger diameter piece than the original, the OEM. Knuckles seem like they're just as nice. I mean, it's just cast metal of some alloy, I'm sure. What I did is, and you'll see it's a little bit wet down here. I know it's a little hard to see on the camera, but where the rack and pinion is, I ended up spraying that with WD-40 just to get some of the, just to make it a little easier over the rust. What you'll want to do is make sure that when you're putting this thing on, you're putting it on kind of coming through the same opening in your frame right around here behind your power, your brake booster, between your brake reservoir and such. So it's going to come up through here where my light is sitting right now. And then what came with the kit was just a new set of hex bolts, and they've got a locking screw or a lock washer with them. Maybe another tip would be is that these aren't keyed, these splines aren't keyed, but when you're installing it, it doesn't hurt to put it on in a way that makes it easier for you to install the nut. Now, I didn't see any recommended torque settings for this kit. Probably why they include a set of lock washers with things. So I would just say tighten it down tight. You don't have to break anything, but you've got the lock washer. That's your retention method. Okay, guys, next step. The instructions from Super ATV actually tell you to go retighten this up. I think that had I seen that earlier on, I would not have loosened it in the first place and disconnected these wire harnesses of mine. Instead, I would have just worked on getting the knuckle off. I think there's probably enough play in that steering column that you could have loosened the knuckle and slid it off. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I would have tried that prior to loosening everything up here off. And mainly because, like you had seen before, the 12 millimeter hex bolts are a little hard to get out, and they're equally hard to get back into place. That said, the next step is to put on our motor mount and the module mount, and that's going to get installed on here. We have two oblong holes that kind of line up with two oblong holes in the two kind of, channels there of this bracket. So that'll go on like this, and then we have a flat nut that gets installed from the top side, and it's a flat rectangular nut so that it binds up as you're tightening it. It can't turn further than that. So we can put that in place, and then there is a 15 millimeter hex bolt that'll get installed from below. So that'll come up from underneath like this. Again, I didn't see any torque specs called out in the instructions. The bolts, though, they have kind of the serrated head on them. So as they tighten, they bite down into the base metal. And that should be probably adequate for tightening it or for locking it into place. Yeah, one thing you'll want to be certain of is that you still have enough clearance between where this plate's being installed and where your frame starts, this tubular frame, that it's not pinching the wire bracket you've got that are, in my case, going up to where my turn signals and things, my turn switch and things are installed. I think maybe for this step, I'm only going to loosely tighten them. I don't want it to be so snug I can't adjust it, because I don't know if we need to leave some play in there for aligning things down the road. So for now, I'm just going to tighten them to the point that it's not flopping, but not so much so that I can't slide it around a little bit. Our next step then, once we get that bracket kind of in place, we still have access to these 15 millimeter heads on these sides of the bolts, so we can still tighten it up as needed. I've got the new knuckle for the top end. It looks like it's, you know, identical on both ends, so I don't know that it matters one way or the other. But that just gets installed on the old steering wheel shaft coming through. And while it's not specifically keyed, you still need to leave yourself the alignment for that notch that's in the column. Okay. And I think it's maybe important to point out, just like you would on any kind of steering project, you want to make sure that your tires and your wheel are aligned before you go connect your steering column. Otherwise, you'll be driving around with your steering wheel pointing one way and your wheels going the other. So on the actual motor, we're going to do a little pre-assembly. I'm down here on the floor working on it. We've got this bracket. It's got a slight bend to it. The motor's positioned in this direction so that when you put the bracket on, it's got these 3 mounting points to secure it in place. Again, there's a lot of slop allowed in this kit, probably for the different configurations that it can be installed on. So I'm not going to tighten these down to the point that I can't adjust it. I just want to get them, you know, loosely on there. That way, when I kind of hold everything into the kit or hold everything onto the rig, we can see how it actually aligns and fits and everything. Honestly, though, I'm pretty impressed by this motor. Like I mentioned before, it feels beefy. I'm not an expert on these kinds of things, but one, it seems well made. You can see it's got all of its quality marks on it, anti-rotation things. It seems like a nice clean kit with OEM wiring harness and things on it. So I'm really optimistic to see how this works on our Viking here. All right, with the motor pre-assembled to that plate, and I've got the cable harness hanging low, I think what I'm going to do is attach it first to the knuckle of this lower section. Got to take out this 13 millimeter hex bolt and lock washer. Slide that on place. Let's see, that might have gone a little too far in. Because we've got that notch in the spline to let the bolt pass through. Get my 13 millimeter out. And I think we can snug these guys down because there's not much adjustment that you can do to it. And with that one in, then we can attach it to this top end one. Just as before, we've got to take out the original bolt because it can't pass through the spline with that bolt in place. Remember, there's a little bit of adjustment that's possible with this the lower end column section. As I had pointed out before, that can slide up and down, and I think that'll help us get these in. So there's it attached on the top end. Oops. I'm gonna just turn my wheel back so it's straight again, and get it into the spline. It's a little awkward to get this bolt in, but I'd rather that than look at a sideways steering wheel. Okay, so we have both knuckles on both ends of the motor installed. Now the two remaining bolts that are with this kit, let's see what size they are. 13s again. Yep, 13 millimeter bolts. And then there's a couple of these nylon locking cap screws, or cap bolts, cap nuts. Can't talk. I'm going to put these through, and that's what holds the motor. Let's see, the motor to this mounting bracket. You know, I always prefer to have the bolt side out and the nut hidden. I don't think it matters in this application. I just think it looks cleaner that way. That way with the excess threads, it's kind of pushing through into a hidden spot. So I'm going to do that. Right now, this motor is kind of just resting on the body of the side-by-side. And what I'd like to do is I still have good access to these 10 millimeter bolts that are securing the motor to this first mounting bracket. I still have good access to everything back here, these large 15 millimeter ones. So what I want to do is kind of just square up these two plates firstly as I draw the two 13 millimeter pair together. And once these are done and snugged up, then I might draw the whole thing up towards the steering wheel a little bit with these two back ones. And then finally I'll adjust the rotation of it with the 10 millimeter ones. We'll get the 15 millimeter driver on there. And it doesn't look like I can pull it up too much further than where it's at. That might be, we've got a little bit of flexibility with the steering column. I'll need to rotate it all the way out, I think, away from where my parking brake is, so it's not rubbing there. Unless I can get it further up, but I don't think I can. What other adjustments do I have? I think that's about it. So maybe just by tightening up this plate, I can rock the motor out a little bit, and that'll keep things from rubbing on each other. Okay, wire harness is still free. Everything's still attached. And now that these are set, then I'm just going to tighten up the 3 bolts on this flange face. I believe those are 10 millimeter. Yep. So we'll do that. And I'm going to try to rotate the motor up and away a little bit, because there is a little bracket back here in this back corner where my parking brake is going to rub into it if I let it sit as is. There's not a ton of clearance when I'm done with it, but that's probably okay. It's pretty nice and stout feeling mechanism there. All right, that's all in place. I got good clearance underneath here. Not a ton of clearance back here, but I don't think it's going to cause me any problems. Our next step then is to take the power steering module, and that gets installed. There's 2 threaded holes on the back side. That gets installed through these 3 holes on the top bracket. Now it looks like I've still got plenty of clearance for my cable bundles, as this is just going to sit like this on top of there. These are little captive screw sets with a flat washer, a lock washer, and they look like another 10 millimeter head on them. See if I can reach this one on the back side. It's a simple thing, but something I appreciate is that, you know, whatever we did for this method of tightening things up in the order that we did, it's that, you know, this is actually parallel between the module and the frame. I know that functionally it doesn't make much difference if it is or isn't, but it's nice aesthetically speaking to have something that looks like it was intentional. And it's of all of these ones, these are the only 2 mounting points that didn't have a slotted hole in them where you could tune it if you needed to. I'm getting this backwards here. Again, a pretty polished looking piece of hardware. Sometimes you get these aftermarket kits, and they're a little bit cheap looking, but this seems to be pretty nice. So just a quick summary of the hardware that we've installed so far, the mechanical hardware. We started off down below with the new steering column piece, and that goes all the way down to the rack and pinion where it gets installed. There is a little bit of an adjustment here that I have not tightened up yet. I think I probably should at this point. And that just allows this front knuckle to slide up and down on the shaft slightly to make it a little easier to install it then onto the motor for the power steering kind of assembly. We have the two brackets installed here, and those just interface with the original frame section here. Like I said, I don't know that it's necessary to disconnect these four 12mm hex bolts and loosen the steering wheel. I think you could probably do this all without. And likewise, I don't think you need to remove your cable bundle either. Here's a view from underneath. Let me get some lighting in here. Something I want to point out is while I like to put the bolt in from this side, sorry, this guy up here, and push it through so that the extending thread is kind of hidden underneath the bracket. One case where I just lucked out was actually on this back side where the 10mm bolt going up into the module just barely cleared the threads here. So just something to keep in mind. I was able to do it. I didn't have to like finagle it at all. But if the alignment of your system is a little different than mine, you may have a problem there. And you might just need to install the hex bolt from this side and put the nut on this side. Nevertheless, this is all the mechanical hardware installed. We'll have to move on to the cabling now to get this thing to actually communicate with the system. So now with all these components installed, we're going to use the cable bundle that came with the kit to get everything to communicate with each other. We're looking at the front of the side-by-side. Batteries here, we've got our new module installed here with the motor and everything. There are two cable harnesses coming off of the motor. One is a torque sensor that's going to go in the first of the four control module connectors. Then we have power for the motor, which is in the last of the four. And these all connect and align pretty nicely. They're each independently, or they're each unique connectors from each other, so you don't have to worry about them cross-connecting. And then with this adapter cable, we have power to the whole unit, which is this big gray one. Let's see how that goes in here. And make sure that they all seat well. And then we have, I think this is like a switched power so that you're not constantly draining your battery. It's only once you actually have the ignition on that this module will turn on. So that's this last of the four. This little LED that's on the cable assembly, this is for diagnostics. It's to allow you to see that the module's operating as it should. You don't have to port this out somewhere to like through your dash or anything. It's just if you need to see it's running, you can peek under the hood and double check things. I think there's some kind of like status light or something that'll blink depending on if there's errors or not with it. This cable will go to your battery. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it through probably the same set of cable or through the same hole that the rest of these cable harnesses are running through. It's not the cleanest routing assembly here, routing style, but I think it'll probably work for what we need to do. Honestly, I hate doing vehicle cables. I've never been a fan of it, especially on the vehicles and things that we've rebuilt, because it's never as clean as you think it should be. So this is going to come down, and they're just going to tap into the existing lugs on your onto your battery. Now this switched power, there's one additional unused port up here. That's this guy. So we can just disconnect the plug side and throw this other guy onto it. You know, I think what I may do is actually route the torque sensor and the power for the motor, route them up and behind the actual motor itself. And the reason for that is that, you know, we've got this knuckle down here that's going to be twisting around as you're driving. And I think if I put them on this back side of the motor, I can kind of shield it a little bit better from potentially getting caught up in that knuckle. And then I'd just like to maybe put a wire tie or something on this just to keep everything from jostling around too much. So you have an inline fuse here, if needed, that should protect this and the rest of your unit from faults. One thing I did notice is that, at least on my rig, my battery bolts were bigger than what the eyelets of the pre-installed cables were. So I had to snip those off and put something a little bit larger on so that I could connect my positive and negative terminal. All in all, though, I think this looks fairly clean getting it all installed. I suppose my next step is just to do everything in reverse as far as getting the green cowl back down, the windows installed, and everything else. Well, guys, I got to tell you, it's worth the time and the money to go install one of these power steering modules like what we've done here. The aftermarket kit seemed to be pretty well built, pretty straightforward installation. I think maybe the only couple nitpicks I had about the installation was that I don't think it's necessary to loosen up the steering wheel bracket, those 4 bolts that we kind of fought with. I think you could probably do the job without loosening those. And maybe the only other nitpick I have is that, you know, those cables going to the battery could have used a little bit larger eyelet lug on them so that you could adapt it to your battery a little easier. All in all, though, I'm pretty impressed with it. It makes quite a difference driving the side-by-side around the property. You know, you can steer much more easier, especially at low speeds when you're just kind of going, you know, parking or going through some slow speed trails. You can really turn in and out a lot easier now. So I'm impressed by that. And like I said, it was pretty straightforward, easy to do. So I guess if you guys are considering doing something like this, I'd recommend it. Have a look in the description for a link to the one I installed from Super ATV. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll answer them best I can. Otherwise, consider giving it a like if you find this type of video useful to you. All right, guys, we'll talk to you later. See you on the next one. Bye.